Hi everybody, this is Becca Forsyth in Elmira, New York, talking about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. I've been working on some projects that are reflecting back on our transformational time together in Washington, D.C. I've been doing some deep diving into Reverend Barber's words about moral fusion movement organizing and mobilizing. I love to learn about the different reconstructions our country has experienced in the past when the society as a whole grabbed one another's hands and lifted each other up with a moral fusion energy and power. He says we're in the midst of a third reconstruction, but in order to accomplish this goal, we have to look past what divides us and find a way to stand together. We stand together because we stand together, or so Yara reminded us. All of this talk makes me think of where we all come from in this grassroots organism. We all bring together the experiences of our own unique pasts with the filters our parents placed and the value base from which each of us works. I want to share a little bit about how I got into fighting injustice and standing for equality. My father was a newspaper man who was dedicated to telling truth to power. He taught us about others who did the same thing throughout history. One of the people we learned about was Abbie Hoffman. He was a revolutionary in the 1960s who did a lot of moral fusion organizing of his own. Abbie had a long history of political stunts and antics, including gathering a group to perform an exorcism around the Pentagon and throwing money on the floor of the stock exchange on Wall Street to watch the traders lose their minds as they try to gather up the strewn cash. Dad taught us that men like Abbie who stood up for what they believed in spoke truth to power. Abbie was a member of the Chicago/8, depending on who's counting, trial. A trial of the hippie movement and protests as a way of influencing those in power. Abbie Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Freunds, and Lee Weiner, and Bobby Seale, according to who's counting, were charged with conspiracy, inciting a riot, crossing state lines for that purpose, and other charges based on the protests that were happening during the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. One of the things that came out of this trial was the sentencing speech given by Abbie Hoffman. I can remember my father reading the text of that speech to my brother and I when we were growing up. Another thing Abbie and the trial created was a band my father participated in for over 40 years. I've edited this production of my father's just a little bit to exclude some of the everyday language that my dad used. It was another time and he encouraged the free flow of vulgarity as freedom of speech. There is a spot I didn't edit, but it's in reference to the name of his band, which was Cripple Creek Motherfuckers. Long story, meant for another day, so please forgive the spot of blueness that was my dad. The avenue through which I came to this struggle, warts and all. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce Buddy Roberts, aka Bob Rolfe, as he teaches us a little history lesson that I like to call All Men Are Children of Their Times, Even Revolutionaries, a tribute to Abbie Hoffman. Thank you.
Without Abbie Hoffman, there probably wouldn't have been no Chicago 7. There wouldn't have been no Cripple Creek Motherfuckers either. Now, they probably did more for American cultural history than we did. They influenced a lot of people, including a band out of Ithaca, New York, that was then recording on Capitol Records. And you hear them playing in the background, a cat named Michael Dreyfus. The song was called God Bless the Conspiracy. It's an electric violin run through synthesizers that tells you what they thought of God Bless America. And they donated the proceeds of this song to the Chicago 7 Defense Fund. It's an angry song of an angry time. But one of the greatest things that I ever read to come out of that time was in February 20th, 1970, in U.S. Federal Court in Chicago, Illinois. It was Abbie Hoffman's sentencing speech at the Chicago 7 trial, and with Michael Dreyfus playing behind me, I'll tell you what he had to say. I have read this to my children, and I believe in what he had to say. Right from the beginning of this indictment, up until the very end of the trial, I always wanted to change my plea. I just had a great urge to confess, to say I'm guilty, because I felt the state was calling me an enemy of the state, and I am an enemy of the state. I am an enemy of America. That is as America is now, spelled with a K. Mr. Farad, the prosecutor, says we are evil men. I suppose that's sort of a compliment. He says we are unpatriotic. Unpatriotic? I don't know. That was kind of a jingoistic ring about it. I suppose I'm not unpatriotic. But he says we're un-American. I don't feel un-American. I feel very American. I feel very close to the vision of America in that film, the Yippie film, that you wouldn't allow into evidence because it wasn't supposed to go into our intent. It said it was not that the Yippies hate America. It said they feel the American dream has been betrayed. That's always been my attitude. Hey, look behind you, Judge. I know those guys up on the wall. I know them better than you do, I feel. I knew Adams. I know all the Adams. They grew up 20 miles from my home in Massachusetts. I played with Sam Adams in the Concord Bridge. I was there when Paul Revere rode right up on his motorcycle and he said, "The pigs are coming, the pigs are coming," right on into Lexington. I was there. I know the Adams. Sam Adams was an evil man. Thomas Jefferson? Oh, Thomas Jefferson called for revolution every 10 years. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas had an agrarian reform program that would have made Mao Zedong look like a liberal. I know Thomas Jefferson. Washington? I now respect Bobby Seale's opinion of him as a slaveholder, because he was one. All men are children of their times, even revolutionaries. We are children of our times, and we're not perfect. Washington grew pot. He called it hemp. It was called hemp then. He was probably a pothead. Abe Lincoln, that was another one. In 1861, Abe Lincoln in his inaugural address said, and I quote, "Where the people shall grow weary of their constitutional right to overthrow the government, they shall exert their revolutionary right to dismember that government." He gave that speech. If Abraham Lincoln had given that speech in Lincoln Park in Chicago, he'd be on trial right here in this courtroom, because that's an insightful speech. Judge, it wasn't funny last night sitting in a prison cell, a 5-by-8 room with no light in the room. There was no light. It's not a nice place for a nice Jewish boy to be with a college education. I'm sure my mother'd say that. Speaking about that, I remember when we were speaking before, you said, "Tom Hayden, you could have had a nice position in the system. You could have had a nice job in the firm." We've heard that for the last 10 years, Judge. All of us have heard that. And only our beauty is that we don't want that job. We don't want a job there in the system. We say to young people, there's a brilliant future for you in the revolution. Become an enemy of the state. A great future. You know, Judge, you could save your soul.